Picture this, a massive Royal Navy warship, bristling with dozens of cannons, manned by hundreds of trained sailors, facing off against a weathered pirate vessel half its size, with a ragtag crew of misfits and outcasts. Logic tells us the outcome should be obvious. The Navy ship should obliterate the pirates without breaking a sweat. Yet history tells us a different story entirely. Time and again, small pirate vessels defeated massive naval warships, heavily armed merchant ships, and entire trading fleets. But here's the thing that will blow your mind. It wasn't about firepower. It wasn't about numbers. It wasn't even about better ships or superior seamanship. The secret weapon that allowed pirates to consistently punch above their weight was something far more sophisticated than any cannon or cutlass. They had mastered the art of psychological warfare, lightning-fast tactics, and brutal efficiency in ways that would make modern special forces take notes. These weren't random criminals with boats. They were tactical masterminds who revolutionized naval warfare and created floating empires that challenged the established order of their time. Today, we're diving deep into the tactical genius of history's most successful pirates. We'll uncover the strategies that allowed them to terrorize the seas for decades, outsmart the world's most powerful navies, and build criminal enterprises that generated more wealth than some legitimate kingdoms. By the time we're done, you'll understand why studying pirate tactics isn't just about satisfying historical curiosity, but about learning timeless principles of asymmetric warfare that remain relevant centuries later. The foundation of pirate success wasn't built on what happened during battle, but on what happened before the first shot was fired. Pirates understood something that many naval commanders of their era failed to grasp. The mind is the most powerful weapon in any arsenal. They developed a sophisticated system of psychological manipulation that could cripple enemy morale before battle even began. Let's start with the most iconic symbol of pirate psychological warfare, the Jolly Roger. Most people think of it as a simple skull and crossbones flag, but that's like calling a nuclear weapon a fancy firework. The Jolly Roger was a carefully crafted instrument of terror, and every element was designed for maximum psychological impact. When a pirate ship raised the Jolly Roger, it wasn't just announcing their presence. It was delivering an ultimatum: surrender immediately and live, or fight and die horribly. But here's what made it so effective. Pirates had built such a reputation for keeping their word that merchant crews knew exactly what that flag meant. If they surrendered, they'd likely be robbed but left alive. If they fought, the pirates would show no mercy whatsoever. The psychological impact was devastating. Imagine you're a merchant sailor, probably making barely enough to feed your family, facing down pirates who you know have nothing to lose and everything to gain from your cargo. You see that black flag go up, and suddenly you're not thinking about heroic resistance. You're thinking about your wife and children back home, wondering if you'll ever see them again. Different pirate captains developed their own variations of the Jolly Roger, each designed to communicate specific messages. Some flags featured bleeding hearts, indicating that no quarter would be given. Others showed skeletons holding hourglasses, symbolizing that time was running out for those who didn't surrender immediately. The red flag was perhaps the most terrifying of all, as it meant the pirates had already decided to show no mercy regardless of surrender. But the Jolly Roger was just the beginning of pirate psychological warfare. They understood that reputation was a weapon that could be wielded with surgical precision. Pirates would deliberately spread stories of their own exploits, often exaggerating their cruelty and supernatural powers to build an aura of invincibility. These stories traveled faster than ships in an age before instant communication, creating a psychological battlefield that extended far beyond any physical engagement. Take Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, who turned himself into a living nightmare. This man didn't just look intimidating. He crafted his appearance like a horror movie director crafts a monster. Blackbeard would weave hemp and slow matches into his massive black beard, then light them before battle. Picture this: a giant of a man emerging from the smoke of cannon fire, his beard literally on fire, smoke wreathing his head like some demon from hell itself. But Blackbeard's theatrical approach went far beyond just his appearance. He would strap multiple pistols across his chest, not just for practical reasons, but to create a visual impression of overwhelming firepower. He carried a massive cutlass that gleamed in the sunlight, and he would practice elaborate sword techniques that looked more like a deadly dance than simple combat preparation. His voice was another weapon in his psychological arsenal. Blackbeard could produce a bellow that carried across the water, and he would use this voice to deliver threats and demands that seemed to come from some supernatural source. Witnesses described his war cries as inhuman, more like the roars of some mythical beast than the sounds of an ordinary man. The psychological effect was so powerful that many ships surrendered the moment they saw him, without firing a single shot. Merchant captains would literally order their crews to lay down arms and prepare for surrender the instant Blackbeard's distinctive flag appeared on the horizon. This reputation for invincibility became a self-fulfilling prophecy, as fewer and fewer ships dared to challenge him directly. But Blackbeard wasn't unique in this approach. Pirates across the Caribbean and beyond understood that cultivating a terrifying reputation was more valuable than any weapon. Charles Vane was notorious for torturing prisoners in view of other ships, not out of sadism, but as a calculated strategy to ensure word of his cruelty spread. When other merchants heard these stories, they were far more likely to surrender without a fight, rather than risk the same fate. Bartholomew Sharp developed a reputation for supernatural cunning, spreading stories that he could predict the weather and find hidden treasures through mystical means. While these claims were obviously false, they created an atmosphere of uncertainty and fear that made potential victims more likely to surrender rather than test their luck against someone who seemed to possess otherworldly powers. The genius of this approach was its self-reinforcing nature. The more ships that surrendered without fighting, the more the pirates' reputation grew. The more their reputation grew, the more ships surrendered without fighting. It was a feedback loop that turned psychological warfare into cold, hard profit, reducing the actual risks pirates faced while maximizing their returns. Pirates also mastered the art of disinformation and misdirection. They would spread false intelligence about their numbers, their firepower, and their plans. A single pirate crew might claim to be part of a massive fleet, or hint at secret alliances with hostile foreign powers, or spread rumors about hidden bases and supernatural abilities. In an age before instant communication, these lies could spread faster than the truth, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty and fear that worked to the pirates' advantage. The psychological warfare extended to how pirates treated their prisoners and the communities they encountered. They developed a sophisticated understanding of human behavior that allowed them to extract information, cooperation, and submission with surgical precision. They knew exactly when to show mercy, to demonstrate their reasonableness, and when to display brutality to reinforce their reputation. For instance, pirates would often release some prisoners unharmed while treating others harshly, creating witnesses who would spread tales of both pirate mercy and pirate cruelty. This gave potential victims hope that surrender might save them, while also ensuring they understood the consequences of resistance. It was a carefully calibrated approach that maximized psychological impact while minimizing actual violence. Pirates also understood the power of ritual and ceremony in psychological warfare. They would conduct elaborate ceremonies when inducting new crew members, complete with oaths, blood rituals, and symbolic acts that reinforced the idea that joining a pirate crew was a permanent and mystical transformation. These ceremonies weren't just for show. They created psychological bonds that made betrayal less likely and increased crew loyalty during dangerous operations. Similarly, pirates developed ritualized approaches to combat that maximized their psychological impact. They would approach target vessels in specific formations, fire their cannons in predetermined patterns, and board enemy ships following elaborate protocols that seemed designed more for theatrical effect than practical efficiency. But this theatrical approach was devastatingly effective because it created an impression of supernatural discipline and coordination that demoralized enemies before physical combat even began. The sophistication of pirate psychological warfare extended to their understanding of different cultural groups and how to manipulate their specific fears and motivations. Pirates operating in the Caribbean quickly learned how to exploit the tensions between different European colonial powers. Spanish colonists, English merchants, and French privateers, they would present themselves differently to each group. Sometimes as patriotic rebels fighting foreign oppression, sometimes as legitimate privateers with official commissions, and sometimes as neutral traders who just happened to be heavily armed. This cultural adaptability allowed pirates to operate in the gray areas between different legal and political systems, exploiting the confusion and competition between rival powers to their advantage. They became expert at reading political situations and adjusting their psychological approach accordingly, often turning potential enemies into reluctant allies, or at least neutral parties, who would actively oppose their operations. But psychological warfare was only half the equation. When diplomacy and intimidation failed, pirates had to back up their threats with action. And this is where their tactical brilliance truly shone. Pirates didn't fight fair, because fair fights were for people who could afford to lose. Pirates developed a combat doctrine built around speed, surprise, and overwhelming local superiority that allowed their small, undermanned vessels to consistently defeat much larger opponents. The foundation of pirate naval tactics was ship selection and modification. While naval vessels were built for long ocean voyages and sustained combat, pirate ships were optimized for a completely different mission profile. Pirates preferred smaller, faster vessels like sloops, schooners, and brigantines that could outrun larger warships when necessary and outmaneuver them when combat was unavoidable. These ships were extensively modified for their specialized role. Pirates would reduce the number of cannons to save weight, allowing for higher speeds. They'd modify the rigging for maximum maneuverability, enabling tight turns that larger ships couldn't match. Most importantly, they'd optimize their vessels for boarding actions rather than long-range artillery duels. A typical pirate sloop might carry only 8 to 12 cannons, compared to the 30 or 40 guns mounted on a similar-sized naval vessel. But those cannons would be carefully positioned to provide maximum effectiveness during the specific types of engagements pirates preferred. Rather than mounting guns for traditional broadside combat, pirates would concentrate their firepower toward the bow and stern, allowing them to maintain effective fire while approaching or retreating from larger vessels. The hull modifications were equally important. Pirates would reinforce certain areas to withstand ramming attacks while removing unnecessary weight from others. They'd modify the deck layout to facilitate rapid movement during boarding actions, removing obstacles that might slow down their crew and installing additional rigging points for grappling hooks and boarding equipment. Sail configuration was perhaps the most critical modification. Pirates needed maximum speed and maneuverability, so they would often add additional sails and modify their rigging systems for quick adjustments. A pirate crew could change their ship's speed and direction far more rapidly than the crew of a conventional vessel, giving them crucial advantages in combat situations where seconds could mean the difference between victory and defeat. The crew quarters were also modified to support the pirates' operational requirements. Since pirate crews were typically larger than normal merchant crews, accommodations had to be adjusted accordingly. But more importantly, the ship's layout had to support rapid deployment of personnel during combat operations. Pirates needed to be able to move from below decks to battle stations in minimal time, so internal layouts were optimized for speed and efficiency rather than comfort. The typical pirate engagement began long before the ships came into cannon range. Pirates were masters of reconnaissance and intelligence gathering, and this intelligence advantage was often the decisive factor in their success. They maintained networks of informants in ports across the Caribbean, allowing them to know which ships were leaving, when they were departing, what cargo they carried, and how well they were defended. These intelligence networks were incredibly sophisticated for their time. Pirates would place agents in taverns where sailors gathered, in merchant offices where cargo manifests were prepared, and even in colonial government offices where naval patrol schedules were planned. This information was then transmitted through a complex network of signals and coded messages that allowed pirate captains to make informed decisions about potential targets. The intelligence gathering process would begin weeks or even months before an actual attack. Pirates would track individual merchant vessels through multiple ports, building detailed profiles of their cargo capacity, crew size, defensive capabilities, and operational patterns. They knew which ships carried the most valuable cargoes, which captains were most likely to surrender without a fight, and which vessels were too well defended to be worth attacking. This intelligence advantage meant pirates could choose their battles, engaging only targets they were confident of defeating. They could position themselves along shipping routes at optimal times and locations, maximizing their chances of success while minimizing their exposure to naval patrols or other threats. When pirates decided to attack, they employed what modern military strategists would recognize as combined arms tactics, coordinating multiple types of attacks for maximum effectiveness. The engagement typically began with a pursuit phase, where the pirates used their speed advantage to close distance while staying out of the target's optimal firing arc. Pirates understood that most merchant vessels mounted their heaviest guns as broadside batteries, meaning they could only fire effectively when the target was directly to their side. By approaching from unusual angles, staying in the target's bow or stern arc, pirates could close distance while minimizing incoming fire. This required exceptional seamanship and precise coordination between the helmsman, the crew managing the sails, and the gunners preparing for combat. The pursuit phase also served important psychological purposes. Pirates would deliberately make their approach visible and threatening, flying their distinctive flags and creating as much noise and spectacle as possible. This gave the target crew time to consider their options and, hopefully, decide that surrender was preferable to resistance. During the approach, pirates would often fire warning shots or demonstration salvos, not necessarily aimed at the target but designed to show their firepower and resolve. These shots served multiple purposes. They demonstrated that the pirates were serious about their intentions. They allowed the pirate gunners to check their weapons and adjust their aim, and they gave the target one final opportunity to surrender before serious combat began. Once within range, Pirates employed specialized ammunition designed for their specific tactical goals, while naval engagements focused on punching holes in hulls to sink enemy ships. Pirates needed their targets intact to be profitable. Instead, they used chain shot and bar shot, specialized ammunition designed to destroy rigging, sails, and masts without damaging the valuable cargo hold. Chain shot consisted of 2 cannonballs connected by a chain. When fired, the chain would extend in flight, creating a spinning projectile that could cut through rigging like a scythe through wheat. The devastation this ammunition could cause to a ship's ability to maneuver was incredible. A single, well-placed chain shot could bring down a mast or destroy enough rigging to leave a vessel completely helpless. Bar shot worked similarly but used a metal bar instead of a chain. This ammunition was particularly effective against the horizontal rigging that controlled a ship's sails, and it could disable multiple sail control lines with a single shot. Pirates became incredibly skilled at using this specialized ammunition, often disabling enemy vessels with just a few precisely aimed shots. But pirates also developed their own variations of specialized ammunition. Some used modified grapeshot loaded with metal fragments designed to clear enemy decks without damaging the ship's structure. Others created custom projectiles designed to create maximum psychological impact, such as cannonballs filled with flammable materials that would create spectacular but relatively harmless fires on impact. The goal was always to disable the target ship's mobility as quickly as possible. A ship that couldn't maneuver was helpless, unable to bring its guns to bear effectively or escape. This is where the pirates' superior seamanship became critical. While merchant crews were often pressed men with minimal training, pirate crews were volunteers who had chosen their profession and trained constantly for exactly this type of engagement. Pirate crews practiced their combat procedures constantly, not just during actual engagements, but during the long periods between attacks when they had time to refine their techniques. They would conduct mock battles, practice boarding procedures, and drill on the precise timing required for their various tactical maneuvers. This training extended to every aspect of naval combat. Pirate gunners became incredibly accurate with their specialized ammunition, able to target specific parts of enemy ships with precision that professional naval gunners often couldn't match. Pirate sailors could adjust their ship's sails and rigging faster than conventional crews, giving them crucial advantages in the rapidly changing conditions of naval combat. Once the target was disabled, pirates executed the most dangerous part of their attack, the boarding action. This required getting their ship close enough to the target that crews could jump from one vessel to the other, something that required incredible skill and timing. Pirates used grappling hooks, specialized tools designed to catch in the target ship's rigging and pull the vessels together. But the boarding process was far more complex than simply throwing hooks and jumping across. Pirates had developed sophisticated techniques for securing enemy vessels, neutralizing defensive positions, and establishing control over larger crews. They understood that the moments immediately after boarding were the most critical, as organized resistance had to be prevented from developing. The boarding action itself was where pirates' psychological warfare and physical tactics merged into a devastating combination. Pirates would board screaming war cries, firing pistols, and swinging cutlasses in a display designed to overwhelm and panic the defending crew. But this wasn't mindless aggression. It was carefully orchestrated chaos designed to achieve specific tactical objectives. Pirates understood that most merchant crews had no stomach for hand-to-hand combat. These men were sailors, not soldiers, and when faced with experienced fighters who seemed to relish violence, they often threw down their weapons and surrendered. The key was to create such an overwhelming display of aggression in the first few moments that organized resistance never had a chance to develop. The weapons pirates chose for boarding actions reflected this strategy. Cutlasses were ideal for close-quarters combat on a crowded ship deck. They were short enough to wield in tight spaces but heavy enough to deliver devastating cuts. The curved blade design was particularly effective for slashing attacks in the confined spaces of a ship's deck, where thrusting weapons, like rapiers, would be impractical. Pirates often carried multiple pistols because reloading in the middle of a melee was impossible, so they needed enough firepower for the entire engagement. A typical pirate might carry 4 or 6 pistols during a boarding action, each one loaded and primed for immediate use. This gave them overwhelming firepower advantage in the crucial first moments of close combat. But perhaps most importantly, pirates fought as a coordinated team. While naval combat of the era was often rigidly hierarchical, with officers giving orders and crew following them, pirate crews developed a more flexible command structure that allowed for rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. Experienced pirates would target the enemy ship's officers first, understanding that eliminating command and control would cause the crew to lose cohesion. They'd work in small groups, covering each other and supporting teammates in trouble. This level of tactical coordination was rarely matched by merchant crews who had never trained for combat. Pirates also developed specialized roles for boarding actions. Some crew members would focus on securing the enemy ship's weapon stores to prevent organized resistance. Others would immediately take control of key positions, like the ship's wheel and main mast. Still others would be responsible for identifying and securing valuable cargo while the main combat was still ongoing. The entire engagement, from first contact to victory, was designed to be over as quickly as possible. Pirates understood that time was their enemy. The longer a fight lasted, the more likely it was that other ships might appear, or that the target might organize effective resistance, or that something might go wrong. Speed wasn't just an advantage. It was a necessity for survival. This focus on rapid resolution also extended to post-combat operations. Pirates had refined the art of quickly transferring valuable cargo to their own ships, evaluating prisoners for potential recruitment, and making decisions about what to do with captured vessels. Every minute spent alongside a prize was a minute when rescue might arrive or complications might develop. Pirates developed efficient procedures for sorting through captured cargo, identifying the most valuable items that could be easily transported and disposed of. They knew which types of goods were worth taking and which were too bulky or difficult to sell. This efficiency allowed them to maximize their profits while minimizing their exposure to counterattack. The treatment of prisoners was also systematized. Pirates needed to quickly identify which captured crew members might be useful recruits, which ones posed potential security threats, and which ones could be safely released to spread word of the pirates' capabilities and intentions. This rapid assessment process was crucial for maintaining operational security while building the psychological reputation that was so important to pirate success. But what happened when pirates couldn't rely on speed and surprise? What was their strategy when facing opponents who were expecting them and ready for a fight? This is where pirate tactics became even more sophisticated, as they developed defensive and evasion strategies that allowed them to survive encounters with superior forces. When faced with naval warships or heavily defended convoys, pirates had to completely change their tactical approach. These weren't merchant vessels crewed by reluctant sailors. These were professional military forces with experienced officers, disciplined crews, and powerful weaponry. Fighting them head-to-head was usually suicide. so pirates developed alternative strategies that played to their strengths while avoiding their enemies' advantages. The first principle of pirate defensive strategy was intelligence and early warning. Pirates maintained extensive spy networks that could provide advance warning of naval patrols, convoy schedules, and anti-piracy operations. This intelligence network was their first and most important line of defense, allowing them to avoid unfavorable encounters entirely. These intelligence operations were far more sophisticated than most people realize. Pirates would maintain agents in naval ports who could provide information about ship movements and patrol schedules. They had contacts in colonial governments who could warn them about anti-piracy campaigns before they began. They even had informants among naval crews who could provide detailed information about specific ships, their capabilities, and their commanders' tactical preferences. The intelligence network also included a complex communication system that could rapidly transmit warnings across vast distances. Pirates used coded signals, trusted messengers, and even legitimate merchant vessels to carry information between different parts of their network. This allowed them to coordinate their activities across hundreds of miles of ocean and respond quickly to changing circumstances. When avoidance wasn't possible, pirates employed a range of evasion tactics that took advantage of their ships' superior speed and maneuverability. The most basic tactic was simply running away, but even this required skill and planning. Pirates would jettison anything heavy that wasn't essential, including cannons, ballast, and even cargo if necessary, to maximize their speed advantage. But evasion was far more complex than just sailing away as fast as possible. Pirates had to understand wind patterns, ocean currents, and weather conditions to make their escapes effective. They needed to know which routes would give them the best advantage and which areas might trap them if conditions changed. Pirates also used their superior knowledge of local waters to their advantage. They knew every reef, every shallow passage, every hidden cove in their operating area. They could lead pursuing warships into dangerous waters where the larger vessels might run aground, or lose them in areas where local currents and wind patterns favored smaller, more maneuverable craft. This local knowledge was incredibly detailed and constantly updated. Pirates would maintain charts that showed not just the locations of hazards and safe passages, but also information about tides, seasonal weather patterns, and the behavior of local wildlife that might indicate changing conditions. This information gave them enormous advantages when operating in familiar waters. One particularly clever tactic was the use of decoy vessels. Pirates would sometimes use a smaller, faster ship as bait to draw enemy vessels away from a main target or into a trap. The decoy would make itself visible to pursuing forces, then lead them on a chase while the main pirate force escaped or attacked a different target entirely. These decoy operations required careful coordination and timing. The decoy vessel had to be fast enough to stay ahead of pursuers, but not so fast that the chase would end too quickly. The crew had to be skilled enough to maintain the deception while avoiding capture, and the main force had to be positioned to take advantage of the distraction. Pirates also developed sophisticated camouflage and deception techniques. They would disguise their ships to look like harmless merchants, complete with fake cargo visible on deck and crew members dressed as civilian sailors. Some pirates became experts at forging documents and letters of marque, allowing them to pose as legitimate privateers when challenged by authorities. The deception could be incredibly detailed. Pirates would study the appearance and behavior of legitimate merchant vessels, copying everything from their sail configuration to their crew's clothing and behavior patterns. They would prepare false cargo manifests, forged identification papers, and even fake personal letters, that would support their cover story if they were boarded and searched. Some pirates became so skilled at this deception that they could maintain their disguise even under close inspection. They would train their crews to act like legitimate sailors, complete with appropriate skills, knowledge, and mannerisms. This level of preparation allowed them to operate in areas where their true identity would have meant immediate capture and execution. The most audacious pirates would even impersonate naval vessels, flying false colors and maintaining military discipline until they were close enough to their targets to reveal their true nature. This required incredible attention to detail and thorough knowledge of naval procedures, but the psychological impact was devastating when executed properly. When forced to fight against superior forces, pirates employed hit-and-run tactics that avoided prolonged engagement. They would make quick attacks designed to cause maximum damage and confusion, then withdraw before organized resistance could develop. These attacks might target a convoy's weakest vessels, or attempt to isolate and capture stragglers who had fallen behind the main formation. Hit-and-run tactics required precise timing and excellent seamanship. Pirates had to coordinate their attacks to achieve maximum impact in minimal time, then execute rapid withdrawals that would prevent effective counterattack. This meant every crew member had to understand their role and be able to execute it perfectly under combat conditions. Pirates also developed tactics for fighting in groups, coordinating multiple vessels to attack larger targets from different directions simultaneously. This required excellent communication and timing, as attacking ships needed to coordinate their movements to avoid accidentally firing on each other while maximizing the confusion and panic among their targets. Group tactics were particularly effective against convoys, where pirates could use their superior speed and maneuverability to isolate individual vessels from their escorts. By attacking from multiple directions, they could prevent the convoy from maintaining its defensive formation and create opportunities to capture valuable prizes without facing the full defensive firepower of the escort vessels. One of the most effective group tactics was the wolfpack approach, where multiple small pirate vessels would stalk a target over several days, taking turns harassing it while others rested and resupplied. This constant pressure would exhaust the target's crew and consume their ammunition, leaving them vulnerable to a final coordinated assault when they were too tired and depleted to mount effective resistance. Pirates also mastered the art of strategic withdrawal. They understood that sometimes the best tactical decision was to disengage from an unfavorable engagement and wait for better circumstances. This required discipline and good judgment, as crews had to resist the temptation to fight when the odds were against them. But perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of pirate defensive strategy was their use of psychological warfare even in retreat. Pirates would spread disinformation about their intentions, making enemies believe they were planning attacks in one area while actually operating somewhere else entirely. They'd exaggerate their losses after defeats to make enemies overconfident, or exaggerate their successes to maintain their reputation for invincibility. Now, let us examine how these tactics played out in real historical situations by looking at some of the most successful pirates in history and analyzing their methods in detail. These case studies will show how abstract tactical principles were applied in practice and what made certain pirates so devastatingly effective. Edward Lowe stands out as perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated pirate of his era. Lowe understood that his reputation for cruelty was his most valuable asset, and he cultivated it with the same care that a modern corporation manages its brand image. But Lowe's brutality wasn't random or sadistic. It was carefully calculated to achieve specific tactical and strategic objectives. Lowe's background gave him unique insights into the psychology of merchant sailors. Before becoming a pirate, he had worked as a rigger and sailor on legitimate vessels, giving him first-hand knowledge of how merchant crews thought and behaved. He understood their fears, their motivations, and their breaking points in ways that other pirates often missed. His signature tactic was to torture or kill prisoners in view of other vessels, creating witnesses who would spread tales of his cruelty throughout the Caribbean. But he was selective about when and how he employed violence, understanding that indiscriminate brutality could backfire by encouraging resistance rather than submission. For example, Lowe would often spare ship captains and officers who surrendered immediately, while severely punishing those who offered any resistance. This created a clear incentive structure that encouraged quick surrender while demonstrating the consequences of defiance. The message was unmistakable: cooperate and live, resist and suffer horribly. Lowe's most famous psychological operation occurred when he captured a Portuguese ship carrying a fortune in gold. Rather than simply taking the treasure and releasing the crew, Lowe forced the Portuguese captain to watch while he slowly tortured and killed several crew members. Then he released the captain with a message to spread throughout the Portuguese colonial empire about what happened to those who resisted Edward Lowe. The psychological impact of this operation was enormous. Portuguese merchant vessels began surrendering to any pirate ship that even resembled Lowe's vessel, often giving up their cargo to pirates who weren't even associated with Lowe's crew. The reputation he had built became a weapon that other pirates could exploit simply by operating in the same general area. Lowe's psychological tactics extended to his crew management as well. He maintained discipline through a combination of shared profits, democratic decision-making on some issues, and swift, brutal punishment for betrayal or cowardice. This created a crew that was both loyal and fearless, essential ingredients for successful piracy. His approach to crew recruitment was equally sophisticated. Lowe would carefully evaluate captured sailors, looking for those who showed potential for piracy while weeding out those who might become security risks. He understood that forced recruits were often unreliable, so he focused on finding men who could be genuinely converted to the pirate lifestyle. Lowe's tactical innovations included the use of multiple small vessels working in coordination, allowing him to attack targets from several directions simultaneously while maintaining the speed and maneuverability advantages that were crucial to pirate success. His fleet could scatter when faced with superior forces, making it nearly impossible for naval patrols to eliminate his entire operation in a single engagement. The coordination required for these multi-ship operations was remarkable. Lowe's captains had to understand each other's capabilities and limitations, coordinate their movements without modern communication systems, and adapt to rapidly changing circumstances while maintaining their tactical coherence. Lowe also pioneered sophisticated intelligence gathering operations, maintaining networks of informants in ports throughout the Caribbean who would provide information about shipping schedules, cargo manifests, and naval patrol patterns. This intelligence advantage allowed him to choose his targets carefully and avoid unfavorable encounters. His intelligence network included corrupt colonial officials, dishonest merchants, and even naval personnel who were willing to sell information for profit. This network provided Lowe with advance warning of anti-piracy operations, detailed information about valuable cargoes, and insight into the tactical plans of his enemies. Bartholomew Roberts, known as Black Bart, represents the opposite end of the tactical spectrum from Lowe, where Lowe relied primarily on psychological warfare and terror. Roberts built his success on discipline, organization, and tactical excellence. Roberts commanded what was essentially a floating military organization with strict codes of conduct, professional standards, and hierarchical command structure. Roberts came from a different background than most pirates. He had served as an officer on legitimate merchant vessels and had received formal training in navigation, seamanship, and naval tactics. This background gave him a systematic approach to piracy that was rare among his contemporaries. His tactical genius lay in his ability to organize large-scale operations involving multiple ships and crews. Roberts developed standardized procedures for everything from ship maintenance to combat formations, creating an efficiency and effectiveness that most legitimate navies of the era couldn't match. Roberts' most famous innovation was the development of what modern military strategists would recognize as combined arms tactics. He coordinated his various vessels to perform specialized roles in combat: fast scouts to gather intelligence and harass enemies, heavily armed ships to deliver decisive attacks, and support vessels to handle logistics and prisoner management. This specialization allowed Roberts to conduct operations of unprecedented complexity and scale. His fleet could simultaneously attack multiple targets, maintain extended blockades of important ports, and conduct reconnaissance operations across vast areas of ocean. The coordination required for these operations was remarkable, given the communication limitations of the era. Roberts also revolutionized pirate logistics, establishing a network of supply bases and friendly ports that allowed his fleet to operate over vast distances without depending on captured supplies. This logistical sophistication enabled him to conduct operations far from traditional pirate strongholds, often appearing in areas where merchants and naval forces least expected him. His supply network included hidden caches of ammunition and provisions of corrupt colonial officials who would provide safe haven in exchange for a share of profits, and relationships with legitimate merchants who would trade with pirates despite legal prohibitions. This network gave Roberts strategic mobility that his enemies couldn't match. His approach to crew management was equally innovative. Roberts established a written code of conduct that governed everything from the division of prizes to personal behavior aboard ship. This code created predictable consequences for various actions, reducing conflicts among crew members and maintaining discipline without the arbitrary brutality that characterized many pirate operations. The code included provisions for democratic decision-making on important issues, fair distribution of captured wealth, and even primitive forms of disability insurance for crew members injured in combat. This systematic approach to crew management created loyalty and efficiency that was rare in the pirate world. Roberts' tactical flexibility was legendary. He could adapt his methods to different types of targets and circumstances, employing lightning raids against lightly defended merchants, coordinated fleet actions against convoys, and sophisticated deception operations against naval forces. His ability to shift between different tactical approaches made him extremely difficult for enemies to counter effectively. One of Roberts' most successful operations involved the capture of an entire Portuguese treasure fleet. Rather than attacking the ships directly, Roberts used intelligence and deception to position his forces along the fleet's route, then employed a series of coordinated attacks that isolated and captured individual vessels before they could organize an effective defense. Perhaps most importantly, Roberts understood the strategic dimension of piracy in ways that many of his contemporaries missed. He recognized that piracy was ultimately a political and economic activity that required careful management of relationships with colonial authorities, merchant communities, and rival pirate groups. Roberts maintained diplomatic relationships with various colonial governors, often negotiating informal agreements that allowed his operations to continue in exchange for avoiding attacks on certain types of vessels or in certain areas. These diplomatic skills allowed him to operate with less interference from legitimate authorities than most pirates faced. Anne Bonny and Mary Read, though they operated for a relatively short time, demonstrated how pirates adapted their tactics to overcome physical disadvantages through superior planning and execution. Operating in an era when women had virtually no legal rights and faced severe social restrictions, they had to develop methods that maximized their effectiveness while minimizing their exposure to capture. Their tactical approach emphasized stealth, deception, and rapid execution over prolonged combat. Bonny and Read would often pose as passengers or crew members on merchant vessels, gathering intelligence about cargo, crew strength, and defensive capabilities before revealing their true nature and taking control of the ship. This inside approach gave them access to information that external attackers could never obtain, allowing them to plan their actions with precision and minimize the risk of effective resistance. They could identify the most valuable cargo, locate weapons stores, and assess which crew members might be recruited versus which ones needed to be neutralized. Their success also demonstrated the importance of psychological preparation and crew loyalty in pirate operations. Despite the social constraints they faced, Bonny and Read earned the respect and loyalty of their crews through competence and shared risk-taking, showing that effective leadership transcended traditional social boundaries when lives and fortunes were at stake. The tactical innovations developed by Bonny and Read included sophisticated disguise techniques, infiltration methods, and close-quarters combat skills that allowed them to operate in situations where traditional pirate tactics would have failed. Their approach required different skills than conventional piracy, but proved equally effective in the right circumstances. Jean Lafitte represents perhaps the most sophisticated example of pirate strategic thinking, as he successfully navigated the complex political landscape of the early 19th century to build what was essentially a pirate state in the Gulf of Mexico. Lafitte's operation was far more than simple piracy. It was a complex political and economic enterprise that challenged the established order while providing essential services to the communities it served. Lafitte's tactical innovations included the development of what modern analysts would recognize as asymmetric warfare techniques. His forces were too small to challenge the U.S. Navy directly, but they were perfectly suited for guerrilla-style operations that could inflict significant damage while avoiding decisive engagement. Lafitte understood that traditional piracy was becoming obsolete due to improved naval patrols and changing political circumstances. Instead of continuing the old model of random attacks on merchant shipping, he created a sophisticated organization that could adapt to changing conditions while maintaining profitability and political relevance. His most brilliant strategic move was positioning himself as an indispensable ally to both sides in various conflicts, playing American and British forces against each other while maintaining his organization's independence and profitability. This required exceptional political sophistication and an understanding of geopolitical dynamics that went far beyond simple military tactics. During the War of 1812, Lafitte managed to simultaneously maintain relationships with British forces who wanted to use his knowledge of Gulf Coast waters, American authorities who needed his help defending New Orleans, and Spanish colonial officials who were trying to maintain control over their territories. This diplomatic balancing act allowed him to survive and prosper while other pirates were being eliminated by increasingly effective naval patrols. Lafitte also pioneered what might be called pirate diplomacy, establishing formal relationships with colonial authorities. merchant communities, and even foreign governments. These relationships provided legitimacy, intelligence, and protection that purely criminal organizations could never achieve. His diplomatic approach included formal negotiations with government officials, written treaties governing his organization's behavior, and even participation in legitimate military operations when it served his interests. This level of political sophistication was unprecedented among pirates, and showed how tactical innovation could extend beyond purely military considerations. His organizational structure was remarkably sophisticated, featuring specialized divisions for different types of operations: naval combat units, intelligence gathering operations, logistics and supply management, and political liaison functions. This level of specialization allowed his organization to operate efficiently across multiple domains simultaneously. The naval combat units were organized along professional military lines, with standardized equipment, training procedures, and command structures. These units could conduct traditional pirate raids when opportunities arose. But they could also perform more complex military operations in support of Lafitte's political objectives. The intelligence operations were equally professional, maintaining networks of informants throughout the Gulf Coast region and beyond. This intelligence capability allowed Lafitte to stay ahead of his enemies and identify opportunities that other pirates would miss. The logistics organization managed supply chains, maintained bases of operations, and handled the complex financial arrangements necessary for Lafitte's various enterprises. This capability was essential for maintaining operations over extended periods and large geographic areas. The political liaison functions were perhaps the most innovative aspect of Lafitte's organization. These personnel maintained relationships with various government officials, negotiated agreements, and managed the complex diplomatic relationships that were essential to Lafitte's survival and success. These historical examples demonstrate that successful piracy required far more than simple violence and intimidation. The most effective pirates were tactical innovators, strategic thinkers, and organizational leaders who developed sophisticated methods for achieving their objectives while managing the complex risks inherent in their chosen profession. The tactical principles they developed were often far ahead of their time, anticipating strategies and techniques that wouldn't be formally recognized by military institutions for decades or even centuries. Their success came from understanding that piracy was ultimately about information, psychology, and economics, as much as it was about combat and coercion. But what made these tactics so effective wasn't just their individual components, but how they worked together as an integrated system. Pirates understood that tactical success required strategic thinking, that combat effectiveness depended on intelligence and preparation, and that long-term survival required political awareness and economic sustainability. The integration of these different elements was what separated successful pirates from the countless others who failed and disappeared into historical obscurity. The successful ones understood that every aspect of their operations had to work together to create overwhelming advantages that could compensate for their fundamental disadvantages in resources and legitimacy. This systematic approach extended to every aspect of pirate operations. Ship selection and modification had to support tactical requirements while maintaining the speed and maneuverability necessary for survival. Crew recruitment and training had to balance the need for combat effectiveness with the requirement for loyalty and discipline. Intelligence operations had to provide actionable information while maintaining operational security. The weapons and equipment choices made by successful pirates reflected this systematic thinking. Every piece of equipment had to serve multiple purposes and contribute to overall operational effectiveness. Pirates couldn't afford to carry unnecessary weight or equipment that didn't directly support their mission requirements. Even the social and cultural aspects of pirate operations were systematically designed to support tactical effectiveness. The democratic elements of pirate society weren't just about fairness. They were about maintaining crew morale and loyalty under extremely dangerous conditions. The brutal reputation that pirates cultivated wasn't just about intimidation. It was about reducing the need for actual combat and the risks that came with it. This brings us to a crucial question. What can modern military strategists, business leaders, and anyone facing asymmetric challenges learn from pirate tactics? The principles that made pirates successful in the Age of Sail remain relevant today, even if the specific methods have evolved with changing technology and circumstances. The first and most important lesson is the power of psychological warfare. Pirates understood that victory often depends more on what happens in the enemy's mind than what happens on the battlefield. Modern Special Forces units employ similar principles when they use reputation, deception, and fear to achieve objectives that would be impossible through direct confrontation. In the business world, companies regularly employ psychological tactics that would be familiar to any successful pirate captain. They build reputations for aggressive competition, use deception and misdirection to confuse rivals, and create psychological pressure that forces competitors to make poor decisions. The principles remain the same, even if the stakes and methods are different. The application of psychological warfare in modern contexts requires the same systematic approach that made pirates successful. Modern organizations need to understand their audiences, craft messages that achieve specific objectives, and maintain consistency between their reputation and their actions. The same feedback loops that made pirate psychological warfare so effective can be seen in successful marketing campaigns, political movements, and competitive strategies. The second key lesson is the importance of speed and decisive action. Pirates couldn't afford prolonged conflicts because they lacked the resources for sustained operations. Modern military forces facing asymmetric threats employ similar tactics, using speed and surprise to achieve objectives before enemies can organize effective responses. This principle applies equally well to business competition, where companies that can identify opportunities and exploit them quickly often succeed against larger, more established rivals who are slower to adapt. The startup ecosystem is built around principles that pirates would recognize immediately, identifying opportunities that larger players overlook, moving quickly to exploit those opportunities, and using limited resources more efficiently than larger competitors. The speed advantage that modern organizations can achieve through better decision-making processes, more flexible organizational structures, and superior information systems mirrors the advantages that pirates gained through better seamanship, superior intelligence, and more efficient operational procedures. The third crucial lesson is the value of intelligence and preparation. Pirates succeeded because they chose their battles carefully, gathering extensive information about targets and circumstances before committing to action. Modern military doctrine emphasizes intelligence gathering for the same reasons, recognizing that information advantages often determine the outcome of conflicts before fighting begins. In competitive situations of all kinds, those who invest in understanding their environment, their opponents, and their own capabilities are far more likely to succeed than those who rely on superior resources alone. Pirates proved that knowledge and preparation could overcome significant disadvantages in equipment and numbers, a lesson that remains relevant in any competitive environment. the intelligence advantages that modern organizations can achieve through data analytics, market research, and competitive intelligence gathering provide the same types of benefits that pirate spy networks provided in the 18th century. The specific tools and methods have evolved, but the fundamental principles remain unchanged. The fourth important principle is organizational flexibility and adaptation. Successful pirates constantly evolved their tactics in response to changing circumstances and enemy countermeasures. They maintained organizational structures that could adapt quickly to new challenges while preserving the core capabilities that made them effective. Modern organizations face similar challenges in rapidly changing environments where traditional approaches may become obsolete quickly. Companies that can maintain their core competencies while adapting their methods to new circumstances are more likely to survive and prosper than those that rigidly stick to established procedures. The organizational innovations developed by pirates, including democratic decision-making elements, performance-based compensation systems, and flexible command structures, can be seen in many successful modern organizations. The same principles that made pirate crews effective under extreme conditions can help modern teams perform better in competitive environments. The fifth key insight is the importance of managing relationships and reputation. Pirates understood that their long-term success depended on how they were perceived by various stakeholders, including potential victims, rival groups, colonial authorities, and their own crews. They carefully managed these relationships to create environments that supported their operations. Modern leaders face similar challenges in managing complex stakeholder relationships while pursuing competitive objectives. Success often depends on building coalitions, managing perceptions, and creating win-win situations where possible, while maintaining the ability to act decisively when necessary. The reputation management techniques developed by pirates, including the strategic use of both cooperation and intimidation, the careful cultivation of specific images for different audiences, and the systematic reinforcement of desired perceptions through consistent actions, remain relevant in modern competitive environments. Perhaps most importantly, pirates demonstrated that innovation and creativity could overcome almost any disadvantage if applied systematically and persistently. They faced opponents with superior resources, better equipment, more training, and legal authority. Yet they consistently found ways to succeed through tactical innovation and strategic thinking. This lesson remains relevant in any competitive environment where established players have significant advantages over newcomers or challengers. History shows repeatedly that innovative tactics, creative strategies, and persistent execution can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds, whether on the high seas of the 18th century or in the corporate boardrooms of the modern world. The tactical legacy of piracy extends far beyond maritime warfare. The principles they developed have influenced military doctrine, business strategy, and competitive analysis for centuries. Special forces units around the world employ tactics that would be instantly recognizable to successful pirates. Emphasis on intelligence gathering, psychological warfare, speed and surprise, and the ability to operate independently in hostile environments. Modern asymmetric warfare draws heavily on pirate tactics, as smaller forces attempt to achieve political or military objectives against superior opponents through indirect methods. The same principles of avoiding enemy strengths while exploiting weaknesses, using psychological pressure to achieve objectives that would be impossible through direct confrontation, and maintaining flexibility and adaptability in the face of changing circumstances can be seen in successful military operations. Around the world, in the business world, disruption strategies often mirror pirate tactics. Small companies use speed, innovation, and psychological pressure to challenge established industries, often succeeding despite lacking the resources and market position of incumbent players. The startup ecosystem is built around principles that pirates would recognize immediately, identifying opportunities that larger players overlook, moving quickly to exploit those opportunities, and using limited resources more efficiently than larger competitors. The venture capital industry itself employs many of the same risk management and portfolio diversification strategies that successful pirates use to survive in an extremely dangerous environment. The same understanding of risk and reward, the same emphasis on intelligence and preparation, and the same focus on rapid execution can be seen in successful investment strategies. But perhaps the most enduring lesson from pirate tactics is that success in competitive environments requires more than just superior resources or favorable circumstances. It requires understanding the psychology of competition, the importance of preparation and intelligence, the value of speed and decisive action, and the need for constant adaptation and innovation. The pirates who succeeded weren't just better fighters or more ruthless criminals. They were tactical innovators who understood their environment, their opponents, and themselves better than their competitors did. They developed systematic approaches to achieving objectives that went far beyond simple violence or intimidation, creating organizational capabilities that allowed them to consistently outperform better-equipped opponents. Their success came from treating piracy as a profession rather than just a criminal enterprise. They studied their craft, learned from their mistakes, and constantly refined their methods based on results and changing circumstances. This professional approach to an inherently dangerous and illegal activity is what separated successful pirates from the countless others who failed and disappeared into historical obscurity. The systematic approach that successful pirates took to their profession can be seen in many modern competitive environments. Professional athletes study their opponents and constantly refine their techniques. Successful entrepreneurs analyze their markets and adapt their strategies based on results. Military organizations conduct after-action reviews and constantly update their tactics based on lessons learned. The tactical principles developed by pirates were so effective that they influenced military thinking for generations. Naval tactics, special operations procedures, and asymmetric warfare strategies all show the influence of innovations first developed by pirates operating with minimal resources in hostile environments. The emphasis on intelligence gathering that characterized successful pirate operations can be seen in modern military doctrine, where information warfare and intelligence operations are recognized as crucial elements of successful campaigns. The psychological warfare techniques that pirates pioneered are now standard elements of modern military and political strategy. The organizational innovations developed by pirates, including flexible command structures, performance-based compensation, and democratic decision-making elements, have influenced management theory and organizational design for centuries. Many modern organizational structures incorporate elements that can be traced back to innovations first developed by pirate crews operating under extreme conditions. Today, as we face an increasingly complex and competitive global environment, the lessons learned from pirate tactics remain surprisingly relevant. Whether in military affairs, business competition, or any other arena where creative thinking and tactical innovation can overcome resource disadvantages. The principles developed by history's most successful pirates continue to provide valuable insights. The story of pirate tactics is ultimately a story about human ingenuity and adaptability. Faced with seemingly impossible odds, Operating outside the protection of law and social convention, these individuals developed methods for achieving their objectives that were so effective they changed the course of history. Their legacy isn't just in the romantic myths and adventure stories they inspired, but in the tactical and strategic innovations they pioneered that continue to influence competitive thinking centuries later. Understanding pirate tactics isn't just about appreciating historical curiosities or satisfying academic interest. It's about recognizing that innovation, preparation, and strategic thinking can overcome almost any disadvantage if applied systematically and persistently. The pirates proved that small, resourceful groups could challenge the established order and succeed, even against overwhelming opposition. Their methods required courage, certainly, but more importantly, they required intelligence, planning, and the ability to think creatively about complex problems. These are qualities that remain valuable in any competitive environment, whether on the high seas of the 18th century or in the corporate boardrooms and political arenas of the modern world. The ultimate question isn't whether pirate tactics would work in modern naval warfare. Obviously, they wouldn't in their original form, given advances in technology and changes in the strategic environment. The real question is whether the underlying principles they discovered remain valid. That psychological warfare can be more effective than superior firepower. That speed and surprise can overcome numerical disadvantages. That intelligence and preparation are force multipliers, and that innovative tactics can disrupt established systems regardless of resource disparities. History suggests that these principles do remain valid, even if their specific applications continue to evolve with changing circumstances. The pirates who mastered these concepts created a legacy that extends far beyond their relatively brief moment in maritime history, proving that tactical innovation and strategic thinking are timeless sources of competitive advantage in any environment where success depends on outmaneuvering opponents rather than simply overpowering them. As we face our own competitive challenges in a rapidly changing world, perhaps the most important lesson from pirate tactics is that conventional thinking about resources, advantages, and proper methods may be less important than creativity, adaptability, and the willingness to challenge established assumptions about how success is achieved. The pirates proved that unconventional approaches, properly executed, could be devastatingly effective against conventional forces, no matter how well-equipped or professionally trained those forces might be. Their story reminds us that in any competitive environment, those who think differently, prepare thoroughly, and act decisively often have significant advantages over those who rely solely on superior resources or established methods. This insight remains as relevant today as it was in the Golden Age of Piracy, making the study of their tactics far more than just an interesting historical curiosity. The tactical genius of pirates lay not just in their individual innovations, but in their ability to integrate multiple approaches into coherent strategies that could adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining effectiveness over time. This systems thinking approach to competitive challenges remains one of the most valuable lessons we can learn from their example, whether we're facing opponents on the high seas or in the boardrooms of modern commerce.